Hey, what's happening? I'm Claudio, and today I'm building a banquette for our breakfast nook here in the kitchen. A little while ago I built a kitchen table, so if you haven't seen those videos, you can check them out right here. If you want to see how I built this banquette, stick around. Let's make it now.
I picked up supplies at our local Home Depot. All I needed were 3 4x4s and a sheet of 3/4 inch plywood. I arranged several pieces of 4x4 in the plans to form this shape. I grabbed the first board and using the miter saw, cut it up into the 5 sections. I applied a bunch of wood glue to the mating sides and spread it around using a piece of scrap wood, then clamped everything down tight with a lot of clamps. I cleaned up a template I created from the 3D model and then taped it together. This got glued down to the blank using a normal glue stick. I slowly ran the piece through the bandsaw, following as close to the line as possible. I needed to make 4 legs total, and this piece would serve as my template for the other 3. Once I was satisfied with the look and feel, I repeated the process for making the other legs. I chopped the pieces down to their size on the miter saw, and then glued and clamped them up. I removed the clamps once everything was dry and began sanding everything smooth. I used a combination of the belt sander, the random orbit sander, and hand sanding the inside corners and edges. I also marked out a notch where the molding was. I placed the original down and traced it onto the other 3. I transferred the notch from the base molding as well as where the leg would connect to the 2x4 support. The remaining legs were all cut on the bandsaw just like the first one. I cut as close as I could to the line so that I could sand it down later. To remove the material on the inside, I cut through the leg itself. This gave me access with the bandsaw, and then I could glue it back together after the cut. I used joint compound to cover up any gaps or imperfections. Once everything was sanded smooth, it was time for paint. I propped the legs up with clamps on a table outside and grabbed some spray paint. I put on 5 or 6 light coats so I wouldn't have any drips or runs. You can see how much paint flies around, so you should always spray outside. Now I could focus on how to mount the legs in the space. I used a stud finder to figure out where I could secure the cleat to. I cut up a couple 2x4s at the miter saw as well as some temporary legs. I brought them inside and transferred the stud marks onto the boards. I used a speed square to extend the lines across the width of the boards. At the drill press, I used a tapered countersink bit to drill through the boards. I made 2 holes per line. To make installation easier, I placed all the screws into the holes ahead of time. I used the temporary legs and just put the 2x4s in place and screwed them in. Now I could focus on building the seat. Using the piece of 3/4 inch plywood, I cut it down to the correct length using the cordless circular saw. At the table saw, I ripped them down to width and then used a crosscut sled to bring them down to their final length. I bought some 3-inch upholstery foam on Amazon and laid it all out. The cushions were my wife's idea, so I asked her to help me out. I marked out the shape of the plywood onto the foam with a Sharpie and then cut down into it using a razor knife. It takes several passes, but it's really easy to cut. We laid out the fabric and adjusted the foam so it would be the same distance from each edge. I also trimmed off the excess fabric from the end. We grabbed the fabric and rolled it over itself and then stapled it down to the plywood. I've never done this before, so I don't know how many staples to use. I used a lot. The same process was repeated for the opposite side. The trick is to pull the fabric tight before stapling, but make sure that the pattern is consistent throughout. We folded the long sides like we were wrapping a Christmas present and then stapled everything down tight. I cut off the excess fabric from the other side and then repeated the same process. The cushion was now done and comfortable. Now that I knew what to do, I did the exact same thing for the other cushion. In order to secure the legs in place, I marked out where the holes would go. I grabbed the drill, some 3-inch deck screws, and the correct size drill bit. I drilled the holes in at an angle. This would allow the screws to get down into the cleat on the wall. I also used a countersink bit to keep the heads below the surface. I brought everything inside and began attaching the legs to the cleat. I used the impact driver to screw in the deck screws and then made sure everything was level. The floor is a little uneven, so I used a few shims to make sure everything lined up perfectly. The final step was to place the cushions on top of the legs. The banquette was done. It didn't take long for our brand new pup to make herself comfortable. And here's the finished product.
Well, I'm glad I could get this project done. Eating around the table now is much more comfortable, and the banquette looks a lot better than the folding chairs. The nice thing about this project is it's very modular and customizable. You can make as many legs as you want to support different lengths and weight. It also doesn't really need to be in a corner. You could build it on a flat wall. In our case, we needed a table in this corner, so that's where we put ours. If you like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Again, if you missed the videos of me building the table, you can check them out right here. You can follow me on social media at Make It Now channel, and you can find lots of other projects that I've made on my website at makeitnow.tv. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.